It is truly an honor to introduce a remarkable individual whose journey exemplifies resilience, triumph, and an unyielding spirit. Today, we welcome someone whose achievements extend far beyond the slopes, reaching heights that inspire and captivate us all. Recently inducted into the prestigious U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Hall of Fame, our guest has not only left a mark on the world of adaptive sports, but he has also redefined the boundaries of what's possible. Meet Chris Waddell, a living testament to the power of determination and the pursuit of excellence. With an impressive collection of 13 Paralympic medals, Chris is not only a Hall of Famer for the U.S. Ski and Snowboard Association and the Paralympics, but he's also been recognized globally for his indomitable spirit. The Dalai Lama himself honored Chris as an unsung hero of compassion. Skiing Magazine acknowledged his prowess by placing him among the 25 greatest skiers in North America. And People Magazine celebrated his inner and outer beauty by naming him one of the 50 most beautiful people. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming an inspiration to us all, a living embodiment of what it means to defy limits, Chris Waddell.
Thank you so much. That was great. Wow. You know, it's funny. I was waiting. Okay. I'm going to move over here just a little bit. I was waiting at the bottom of the stage, and I was thinking about something that happened when I won my first trophy as a little kid, 10 years old, in a ski race. And it's kind of like the awards are sort of like a room like this where you go to the lodge. And I went to the lodge, and I'm waiting, and a buddy of mine who was 11 came up to me and said, "You got to go to the back of the room." And I said, "Why do I have to go to the back of the room?" He said, "If you go to the back of the room, then they have to clap for you the whole time." Believe it or not, that guy's a stand-up comic now. And I went to one of his shows, and I recounted that story, and he said, "I don't remember that, but it sounds like me." So anyway, I always kind of forget this. I'll move over a little bit, and I think we'll be better on the speaker side. Excuse me. So, anyway, yes, glad to be here. So excited. Thanks to Bill and Sue for starting this whole ball rolling. This was awesome, and it's so cool to come out of winter and come to a little 70-degree weather too. This is kind of nice. This is I can thaw out a little bit before I go back to winter. So anyway, I am going to. Okay, so we are going to talk about Mount Kilimanjaro, jet lag, and Chinese television made me climb Mount Kilimanjaro. So I was pitching a TV show that I wanted to host called I Wish I Could. And it was an expert with a disability who teaches an adventure to an able-bodied person. I wanted to flip the paradigm of who got to be an expert. Because to me, that's like my story. That's the story that I want to tell, the story of how we find a way to persevere, how we find a way to be successful when we're not necessarily the smartest in the room, when we're not necessarily the most talented in the room. In 5th grade, I got in trouble, or my reading teacher tried to get me in trouble with my parents at the parent-teacher meeting because she said that I only read biographies of sports people. And I was like, yes, because I am looking for heroes. I'm looking for people who are doing more than they could possibly do with less than what they could possibly do. Like one of my friends who's a hero, a guy named Ted Ligety. I don't know how much of you guys follow ski racing. He was Mr. GS. He was winning by like gigantic amounts, historical amounts. And during the television coverage, they did an interview with his mother. And the interviewer asked, "So what was Ted like as a kid?" And she said, "Oh," and she's just a sweet woman. She said, just sort of quietly, like, "Oh, you know, all the boys beat him. All the girls beat him. Like, everybody beat him. This guy who went from being, like, the world's best, but back in the day, everybody beat him." And that, to me, is what I wanted to, the story that I wanted to tell in this TV show. And I thought it was a good idea. But I thought I needed a little bit of something else. So I thought, okay, you know what? I'll tell them I need a little hook. So I'll climb Mount Kilimanjaro to promote myself in the show. And I sent all these things out and nobody responded. So I went to Tibet with some friends who do a lot of philanthropic work over there. First day in the hotel, surrounded by 20,000 plus foot mountains, I can't sleep. So I get up and I turn on the television, and this is the Chinese television part. It might be great, I don't know, but I didn't understand any of it. It was all this pageantry. There were like people in whiteface and these flowing robes, and I think there were swords, and I don't know, and it really didn't make any sense. So I turned it off, and I was left with my thoughts. So I opened my journal and I thought, well, you said that this was a good idea, this idea of climbing Kilimanjaro. Are you willing to put your money where your mouth is? And at 3 o'clock in the morning, surrounded by 20,000 plus foot mountains, I decided that yes, this was a good idea. People often ask me, how did you prepare for Kilimanjaro? And my answer is really simple. Everything that ever went wrong in my life. You have no idea what's going to go wrong on the mountain. Only you know that something will, or more than something will go wrong when you're on the mountain. And I know that things have gone wrong. It started for me in 1973, 1974 at a place called Mount Tom in Holyoke, Massachusetts. 680 feet of vertical. So this was a ski area that was about the half the height of the Empire State Building. For any of you, I ski at Deer Valley right now, and it would be 13 of the magic carpets. I'm glad that hasn't worked before, but I'm glad it finally worked, because that seems significant to me. Yeah, it was that kind of glamorous of a place, but it was 10 minutes from our house. My parents both taught skiing there, and my first run, this is back 73, 74, so they would take a crowbar and they would create the hole to put the bamboo gate in. And so our starting gate were 2 bamboo gates. And I'm waiting my turn, and I'm not nervous at this point because it's actually, I get my chance to be like the big kids. I get my chance to go and to actually do this. And so I did the course, and I finished, and the guy in the back there, you can see with the big beard and the hair, I didn't mention this is the 70s. Rob Broadfoot, he was at the bottom, and he said to me, you know, I like how you were getting after it. I like how you were aggressive. And I want you to remember one thing. The upper body's along for the ride. I'd heard this a lot in ski racing, but it was the first time that I'd ever heard it. Because you're thinking, you know, you're like, okay, well, I want to move everything and want to get in. It's like, no, there's this efficiency. Like your legs are the things that are going to make you go fast. But it was a search for simplicity. From that very first time as a 6-year-old. Da Vinci said that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And ski racing, I think, like so many other things, I know there are probably so many golfers here, right? There's so many simple things. Like ski racing, it's a simple sport if you do it well. There are only so many things that go into making a turn. Get aggressive from the skis up. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. But the fastest is a clean arc. And so over and over again, this is what I was practicing. By the time I was 13, I was #1 in the region. And then I turned 14, and you go from 13 and under to 14 and over. So suddenly it was all the little kids, then it was like, well, there are guys with like beards and girlfriends. They might have had a beer last night. This was a totally different deal. And I won my first ski race that is a 14-year-old, but then I went a year and a half without finishing. Over and over again, something came up in every single race, and I couldn't, why are we going like that? I couldn't figure out a way to make it to the finish line. And as you can imagine, okay, why are we doing that? There's some gremlins in the system here. Seriously. I'm not, okay. Is somebody just subtly telling me that I need to pick it up? Is this the issue? Like, is that a problem? Am I going too slowly? I mean, I'll totally. Anyway, so I'll go back to the fight. But the thing is, as you might imagine, I mean, my confidence got totally crushed as I couldn't make the finish line. This was my first love, but it was something that I thought, I ended up having two choices. One, I could quit, which would be the thing that would keep that pain at bay, right? It would keep me from experiencing that frustration, that pain, that failure, from being effectively a failure, or I could keep going. What was it that Kipling said? He said that if you can meet triumph and despair, and if you meet triumph and despair and see the two for imposters for just who they are, and you're actually doing something, right? And that to me was what ski racing was all about, was triumph and failure and meeting those two imposters, right? And knowing that I had to find a way to continue to move forward. I need to move forward. And so I thought, you know what? I'm gonna rebuild myself. And I rebuilt myself, and the next year I was starting with like kids who were a couple of years younger than me, but I rebuilt it, and I went to college. And when I went to college, I went to a place called Middlebury College in Vermont. So Division III school, but Division I skiing. And I said, you know what? I'm gonna be an All-American, top 10 in the country. My brother, who was an All-American, said, nobody does that. Like, nobody goes from where you were to being an All-American. And I was like, good, because that's exactly why I want to do it. Like, I want to find out how good I can be. I want to figure out if I dig into the depth of who I am, that I find something, that I figure out how I can be successful moving on. So we did dryland training before the season started. And my goal was always to push myself to the point that I wanted to quit. Because if I pushed myself to the point that I wanted to quit and then move beyond it, then I was creating something new. Then all those things that bound me in the past, they wouldn't be the history that I had to live going forward. I could create something new. So this is what I did toward the end of the season, end of the fall. We were doing a series of sprints. Coach broke us into two groups, and we did weird sprints. Like sometimes we'd just do like regular sprints, but then we'd run with somebody on our back, then we'd do standing broad jumps out and back. And in the middle of this, we all experienced this, I felt like I was going to be sick. I was convinced that I was going to be sick. My goal in each sprint was to win the sprint, right? So the coach would blow the whistle, and even though I felt like I was going to be sick, I went as hard as I possibly could, and then the nausea would meet me when I returned to the finish line, and I was like, okay, this is it. And it wasn't just doing sprints, it was preparing for that moment that I got to the starting gate. Because the starting gate is where you make your concessions, where you go, oh, you know what? It looks too steep, the course is all chewed up. Like, there's a reason to back off, there's a reason to not give my best when I get into the starting gate. All my fears come to meet me right there. And I loved when I read James Clear's Atomic Habits, because it confirms so much of what I knew, is that a habit is something that we do over and over again until it becomes automatic. And when the coach blew the whistle, I went as hard as I could because I wanted it to be automatic when I got into the starting gate. That you get into the starting gate and it's about going forward and going faster. And the two things I learned that day, one, I actually didn't get sick, so I could have gone harder.
Wow.
But two, I needed to continue to find challenges that would stretch me, because that's the only way that I was going to be successful. Little did I know, little did I know that I'd actually get challenged way more than I thought I would. My first day of Christmas vacation, I'd come home from Middlebury, went to the mountain where we'd grown up skiing, so we'd left Little Mount Tom and went to bigger Bercheries, which was just about 70 feet short of the height of the Empire State Building, minus the spire. So it was a little bit bigger, but not huge by any means. Locals lovingly call Berkshire Ice or the Beast. It's steep, it's narrow, it's icy. All the trails seem to tilt toward the woods. But on this day, December 20th of 1988, it was warm, it was sunny. There was only one trail open. They had blown snow on one trail, so you saw this just one strip of white snow just snaking down this totally black brown mountain. But we were going to train slalom that day. And even though we were going to train slalom, I hadn't been on my giant slalom skis. They both rested against the race shack, and I thought, I'm going to try my giant slalom skis. So we went up to the top and we took a couple of runs. And I was searching for that simplicity, that sense when everything made sense. I had worked so hard during the fall, but you want your fitness to work with your technique, to work with your equipment. Everything has to work in concert. And so I'm searching for that feeling, and I go over a knoll, and I make a turn, and my ski pops off. And I fell in the middle of the trail. Didn't hit anything but the ground, and I broke 2 vertebrae, damaged the spinal cord. I don't remember anything after my ski popping off, though. I was in shock. I don't remember snapping myself in half and pulverizing the vertebrae into shards of bone. I don't remember the ski patrol strapping me to the backboard and skiing me down the hill. I do remember at the first hospital my father looking down on me. And my father has this dark mustache and dark glasses, and I thought, I am in big trouble this time. And then the memory faded. And then I was staring into the night sky, and the cold was seeping under my blanket, waiting for the helicopter to fly me to the second hospital. At the second hospital, a nurse told me, don't fall asleep in the MRI tube. I don't know if any of you have been in an MRI tube, but they are claustrophobic. And then she admonished me for falling asleep in the MRI tube. Eventually, the doctor came out, and he found my parents and my brother in what they describe as a dark, dank, separate waiting room. And he came out and he said, your son, your brother's broken his back. He'll never walk again. And the guy turned and he left. I mean, talk about a bedside manner, right? Like he turned and he left, and it was emotional, and they cried. And when they were done, my father said, that's the last time we can cry. We have to be strong for Chris. And when I think back on it, my parents were so strong for us. But I always thought that confidence and strength and confidence was based on what I could do. That if I was good enough, that I could ensure success, and then I should be confident, right? But looking at them, confidence was knowing that whatever was going to happen, you could handle it. You didn't know what it was, but you were going to be able to handle it. And they handled it. And I think back, I have one moment of sort of this clarity. My mother had slept in the chair next to my bed for a week, 10 days or something like that. She eventually went home, and it was the first time that I was alone. And it was as quiet and peaceful as it ever is in the hospital. I don't know if any of you have spent time in the hospital, but it's never quiet and peaceful, right? It's always something beeping or buzzing. The lights are on, somebody's breaking the door open. You know, it's just, but this was as quiet and peaceful. And I lay there all on my own and thought, this is the worst thing that I could imagine happening to me. Like the closest to death that I could imagine coming without actually dying. And in some ways I thought it might have been easier to die because I had no idea where I was going to go. But in the same moment I thought, but I'm still me. Like as much as everything has changed, I'm still me. And if this is the worst thing that I can imagine, and I'm still me, I have nothing to fear. I mean, so often that fear is omnipresent, and it's like, well, I'm going to look ridiculous doing this. I'm going to embarrass myself and my family and, you know, generations of my family and all of these things, right? There are always so many reasons to stop. And I thought, if this is the worst thing I can see, I'm never going to be intimidated again. And in that moment, I said, I'm going to be the fastest monoskier in the world. Now, this is before I'd ever seen a monoski. Or a monoskier. But the year before my accident, or actually a few months before my accident, so in January of that year of my accident, January of '88, I was at a ski race, and it was a big race. There were a bunch of people from national teams at this race, and there was this one-legged woman who showed up, this woman, Diana Golden, and she was scary. She was like Jason from Friday the 13th of athletes, really, seriously. Like, you know this guy, like you feel like you've escaped him, like everything's good, we killed him, okay, we're good, we're safe. And then you look over your shoulder and he's chasing you again. And that's what she was like, because when I first saw her, I was like, what's this one-legged woman doing here? But she's like, look, you know what? I'm gonna fall down and I'm gonna get back up. And I'm gonna keep going. And in that day, I gained a hero. I want to be like Diana. Not only as a ski racer, but I want to be like her as a human being. Those are the scariest people who are like, I'm never going to quit. That's it. I'm never going to quit. And she was also really good. I mean, she beat a bunch of people with 2 legs that day. It was absolutely amazing. So that's what I was thinking when I thought, I'm going to be the fastest monoskier in the world. I did say it out loud to 2 of the guys who were in my class. So I don't know how familiar you guys are with spinal cord injuries, but effectively, like oftentimes we hear, you know, paralysis from the neck down, paralysis from the waist down. That's convenient, but not necessarily accurate, because each vertebrae corresponds to a level of function and sensation. And so my class is the most disabled of the 3 monoski classes. Somebody, I believe lovingly, called my class pumpkins sitting on a fence in the wind for our propensity to topple over. I really just have the muscles like just below my sternum. I think it was intended to be flattering, I think. But I said, I'm going to be the fastest monoskier in the world. This guy in the back of our van who was in my class said, you will never beat those guys. And by those guys, he meant like the double amputees, the guys who had the muscles all the way down to their knees effectively, the paraplegics who were incomplete, who could stand, who could walk. And he had a really good point. I was 30 seconds behind the fastest monoskiers in the world. 30 seconds. So ski racing is a sport that's determined in tenths and hundredths of a second, right? And there's one person on the course. So those tenths and hundredths of a second correspond to like inches and feet behind at the finish line. 30 seconds, 60 miles an hour. That math is kind of easy, right? I was half a mile behind. Meant that they could stop and have a cup of cocoa and still beat me. They didn't, but they could have. Now my breakthrough was, we were training at a place called Purgatory, down in southwestern Colorado. We were doing some downhill training on Upper Hades, and it really was Upper Hades for me. It was all air training, and we were just in the air the whole time. It's all these rollers, and we're watching video at the hotel afterwards. And our head coach, this guy Stefan Hensch, who sort of German descent kind of thing, so had a very direct way of speaking, and he looked at one of the other monoskiers and he said, "Jim, you're the fastest monoskier in the world. Between mistakes." And I thought, hold on, this might be my opportunity. Like, I can't do what he can do, but if I can be closer to 100% of what I can do on each turn, maybe I'll have a chance. So I went home. I was living in Vail, Colorado at the time. Went home and I trained and I set about what I call teaching my body instinct. So I wanted to do everything technically perfectly, even stopping technically perfectly, so that my muscles knew exactly what they needed to do. So that then, when it really mattered, I didn't have to think. Thinking is slow. I had to do it perfectly in training, so I did not have to think. And so I did that over and over again, and then I'd go up to the upper mountain, and I'd get off the number 2 lift, and I'd go across the ridge to Lodgepole. And Lodgepole, there was a jump on Lodgepole, And I'm going and just pointing straight at this thing, and there's that voice in my head, you know, the voice of self-preservation. And it goes, hey, maybe we should make a turn. This would be a good idea. Like, maybe we should make a turn. I'm like, nope. Just gotta relax, and we keep going. And I went off that jump, and I'd land, and oftentimes it'd be all cut up powder, or it'd be bumps underneath, which was great because it forced me to keep the ski pointed down the hill, to find a way to be comfortable being uncomfortable, to get back into control, even though I so just wanted to get the ski across the hill and slow down and go, okay, that was great, that was good, I survived. It's like, no, you've got to survive by finding your way through. And now the only way that you prove that you're the best in the world is by beating the best in the world at the biggest venue. And I moved into the start of the downhill in Lillehammer, Norway. 1994, downhill, fastest of the events. It was good that I'd practiced air because I was in the air 7 times, just at the top. The last one where the Swiss monoskier had rebroken his back in training. It was awful. And so I go through, all that's good. There's this big turn, and then there's this waterfall steep section. And I make the turn, and the big turn was really the only conscious thought I had in the course was going through, and I'm thinking, you're making too much of a turn, like let it go. I let it go, went over this steep section, speed started to roll, 60, 65 miles an hour as I got to the bottom of this. There's a slight turn to the left, and then there's what we call a corridor. I mean, oftentimes you think that each gate, each pole, set of poles is a turn, but in downhill, it's often a direction. It's the 3 gates that are pointed in the same direction, pointing me straight toward the biggest jump on the course. Approach it, and I'm thinking, I'd seen this the year before. I'd seen it in my sleep before I could get to sleep before I could get to sleep every night. I'm approaching this thing, and there's not much I can do. I think, okay, well, just relax. You know, sort of roll your shoulders back and believe. And I flew off that jump about 4 to 6 feet in the air for about 60 feet, and I landed and I finished, and then I had to wait. And I waited for everybody in my class, and none of them beat me. Then I waited for everybody in the next class, the class that really was paralyzed from the waist down, and none of them beat me. Then I waited for the next class, the class of amputees, the guy who at one point I'd been going through deep snow in my wheelchair had walked up behind me and asked if he could push, if he could help. Those guys, and none of them beat me until the final guy, the double amputee, and I'm sitting there in this gigantic scoreboard, and all I can do is look at the scoreboard. And he's just behind me at the first split. And then he's faster going through the speed trap, and he makes the turn, he goes over the waterfall, makes the slight turn, approaches that big jump, and he flies, and he lands. And he finishes 43 100ths of a second behind me. So I'd gone from half a mile behind to being the fastest monoskier in the world. In my mind, I was kind of like Diana. I mean, and I guess by extension, I was kind of like Jason too, right? So I was kind of like that embodiment of what it meant to be human, what it meant to try to find that repetition, that commitment, that discipline to be able to make ourselves better. Now you think that this is the happily ever after moment, right? I mean, this is like you ride into the sunset, you get the girl, you get the gold, you ride into the sunset, everything's good. And after I retired from competitive sport, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. When I was in the hospital after my accident, the doctor didn't want me to leave the hospital because he said I hadn't been depressed. After I'd proven that I could be the best in the world at something, then I actually became depressed. Because I had no idea what my identity was. I had purpose when I was in the hospital. I needed to reclaim my life. I needed to get back to living. After I'd proven that I could be the best in the world, I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I didn't know if I had a platform anymore. So I went out one day in my off-road hand cycle, and I rode up a mountain bike trail by my house. I live in Park City, Utah. It took an hour and 10 minutes to climb this mountain, or to climb this trail. And then I turned around, and that's the fun part, right? I mean, it was like, I've done all this work for an hour and 10 minutes. Like, I get to do the chicanes and get the back end out a little loose and stuff like that. And on my way down, this thought tapped me on the shoulder. And I say it tapped me on the shoulder because I have no idea where this thought came from. And it said, you need to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. And I'm sort of like looking over my shoulder, like, what, really? Why? I don't understand where this is coming from. But when I thought about it, when I'd gone 70 miles an hour, 65, 70 miles an hour on one ski, that picture didn't fit with the picture of somebody in a wheelchair. That was the platform that I had. But from the time we're little, we're taught not to stare at someone who looks different, aren't we? It's impolite to stare. There are 1.2 billion people in the world with physical disabilities, but a lot of them are completely invisible because from the time we're little, we're taught not to stare. And when I retired, I thought I lost that platform, but in climbing Kilimanjaro, I was like, okay, this makes sense. We are all climbing a mountain. Every single day we are climbing a mountain, and it makes sense. And so I had the purpose again. The purpose was to get to the top of the mountain so people could see beyond the wheelchair, to see me, and to see 1.2 billion people in the world like me. Now, I had two problems, though. One, I didn't like to camp. I went to summer camp in upstate New York, and I don't know if any of you spent any time in upstate New York, but it rains all the time. There are thunderstorms all the time, all summer long, so camping to me was wet, cold, and really, really dirty. Like, why would anyone want to do that? There are perfectly good hotel rooms, there are showers, there are beds. Like, why do we need to do this, right? So I didn't like the camp. That part I got over because, well, the equipment can get a little bit better, and living out in Utah, the thing I did learn in Utah is that you always bring your big puffy jacket and your hat, even if it's summertime, because it does get cold during the summer. But the other thing was, I was a sprinter. I was finish line driven. I did not do a meaningful international competition that lasted longer than 2 minutes. This was going to be 8 to 10 hours a day. And the 8 to 10 hours a day, I was lucky. My guide was a guy named Dave Penny, who was just an endurance sport superstar. He lived in Crested Butte, Colorado, 9,000 feet in town, would go for 3-hour runs in the afternoon, up to 14,000 feet. When he would go to the Himalayas, the guide, he would do 3 14ers in a day. Up one, down, up the other, down, and then up to the top and sleep on the top of the third one. Like, this is what I did. And our training was really, we switched to a 4-wheel vehicle from a 3-wheeled vehicle. And actually it has articulation, so each wheel will move as much as 14 inches, so it has a bit of this rock crawler kind of thing, arm pedal power, rock crawler. And our training was really a callousing effect. We'd go out, our first big one was at Crested Butte. It took me 8 hours to climb Crested Butte Mountain. And the vehicle, this one we called Bomba, which was really a more recent iteration. The first one we called the Pig, because it was like 80 pounds. It was so heavy. And the drivetrain, which is just a regular bicycle chain, actually a couple of regular bicycle chains, was really delicate. So if I stayed consistent, everything was good. But if I tried to pedal too hard, the chain could come off and everything would go really badly. So we went up, we came down, and we're on the bike path about a mile from Dave's house. And I am so tired that I thought, you know, maybe I'll just pedal really hard right now, just for a little bit. I'll break this thing, and then Dave will have to like pull me back to his house. I didn't do it, but I totally thought about it. But I was ready, and when I was ready, I got sick. I got an infection in my stomach. I ended up in the hospital for 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
In bed for 3 weeks, lost all of the muscle, all of the fitness that I had. I got out of the hospital, I got onto my trainer like a stationary bike, and I rode the trainer for 10 minutes. And it felt like those last 10 minutes of climbing Crested Butte. We kept training. We went back to Schaefer Trail, which is on the White Room Trail. It's about 1,500 feet of vertical in 3 miles. It was our baseline. It was the first place that Dave and I trained together. And I made it up halfway. And Dave was also a master bike mechanic, and he was always playing with something. And I got into the truck and I said, well, did you change the gearing? Did you do something? And he didn't say anything. And I said, well, maybe it was me. And And he said, yeah, it's you. And in that moment, I didn't know if it would ever not be me. We kept training. I was doing an event in Vail. He brought the rig up. We went out and trained. We went through, it was April, so they groomed the mountain and we'd go across frozen corduroy, went through town, I get to climb flights of stairs in this thing, which is pretty cool. So I'd go up flights of stairs. And we made it all the way east, which is where the race arena is. The group that I was with was going to be at the race arena later that day. The mountain wasn't open yet. I looked at Dave and I said, well, let's climb the race hill. And he's like, always a welcome conspirator. He's like, okay, fine, let's climb the race hill. So we started to climb the race hill. And when I was in 8th grade, earth science, we did an experiment. So we put ice into a beaker, put it over a Bunsen burner, and we took the temperature every minute. And sort of predictably, the temperature went up, right? But then it went flat. I was worried that we'd failed. And then it went up again, and I was like, okay, it's all good. And then it went flat. Climbing the race hill, for me, was the latent heat. So in that experiment, the energy wasn't going into raising the temperature. The energy was going into creating the metamorphosis from a solid to a liquid, from a liquid to a gas. And we climbed the race hill, and that was my latent heat. 2 days later, we went back to Schaefer Trail, and I broke my record at Schaefer Trail. So we were actually ready. We made it to Kilimanjaro the first 3 days on Kilimanjaro, 3,300 feet of vertical in 15K, 9.3 miles. The first day we did it in 6.5 hours. Second day, 10 hours, finished in the dark, cold, and really, really dirty. The last day, we made it to Kibo Hut, 16,500 feet. And this is where it was really going to happen. The first 3 days were really like a warm-up, kind of. And the last day would be 4,200 feet of vertical in 5K. So a third of the distance, 900 more feet of vertical. And it was the cone of the volcano. It was going to be steep and loose. My vehicle was fixed axle rear-wheel drive. So when it got really steep and it got really loose, then I dug a hole. So we put a sailing winch on the front of my vehicle and attached it to my pedals. So I could turn my pedals and I could make this winch turn and I could pull myself up a fixed road. So instead of being rear-wheel drive, it was to effectively be front-wheel drive. And so the problem was we got the sailing winch 3 days before we left. I tried it once. When we used it on the lower mountain, this is in the rainforest, the gears started to grind, it heated up, it got really difficult, it didn't work at all. But when we were at Kibo Hut, we were going to need it, so Dave worked on the winch. We got out for daylight, got on the winch, and it didn't work. And I was staring defeat in the face at this point. We'd spent 2 years trying to get there. And I thought, this is it. I don't care. I'm going to go absolutely positively as hard as I can. They're going to have to pull me off of this mountain. We put down 8-foot-long 2x8 boards. And in his introduction to Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl said that success like happiness can't be pursued. It has to ensue as the unintended byproduct of one's personal dedication to a cause greater than oneself. I kept clicking over this gear, and I felt like I rode on the power of the 1.2 billion people in the world who are effectively invisible, whose lives I was trying to improve. Kept clicking it over and over. Dave thought that we'd stop at Williams Point, that we'd stop at Hansmeier Cave, blew past it onto the scree field. So this is where it gets really steep. You can't even see the boards anymore. Now the worst part was not that it was just steep, it was that you get all the grit and the sand on the boards, and so I'd slip off of the boards. And so it's really steep, and just to get it back on the boards, it was like 10 times steeper than the actual incline. So it was this massive sprint just to get back on, to move forward. We were 30 feet from camp. The porters are setting up camp. I'm 30 feet away and I think, I don't think I can make it. Like, I imagine that this is what it must feel like to drown within sight of shore. Because I was so physically, mentally, and emotionally exhausted that I couldn't make it 30 feet. My nonprofit organization is called One Revolution, and the name is taken from trekking. There are a lot of things that you can do at sea level that you can't do at altitude. So they take what they call a rest step. They take one step and then they rest, and then they take another step and then they rest. For me, the equivalent is one revolution of the cranks. We estimate it took 528,000 revolutions to make it to the top. A lot of little things to reach something big. It was the only way that I made it to camp. And it was an out-of-body experience this day. Like, it was the most amazing thing that I've ever done in sport because I just never thought that I could possibly do it. And I just kept going and going and made it there. And when I got out of the rig into my chair, Bob, who was a fraternity brother in college, who was the chair of my board, who put the money up to actually get us to the mountain, said to me, "You're not going to be able to do it." So we've been all over. There's a boulder field up there. You're not going to be able to do it. We can't find it. And then he backed it up. He's like, no, I mean, I'm sure like you'll be able to do it. I just don't know how. Now, my intention was to be the first unassisted paraplegic to make it to the summit of Kilimanjaro. If I was the first unassisted paraplegic to make it there, it'd be like breaking a record. In my mind, it'd be like back in '54 when Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile and the experts said, humans not supposed to run that fast. Like if he does, his heart and his lungs will explode. And he ran that fast and they watched and his heart and his lungs didn't explode. So they had to look at it differently, you know. Or like Chuck Yeager, like if you break the speed of sound, all the rivets are gonna pop out of the plane. He broke the speed of sound, landed safely. I wanted to force them to look at this differently. So I'm lying there in the tent, and I thought, well, what can I do? So sometimes when I get on a little plane, I'll get out of my chair, and I'll get onto my hands and knees, and I'll have somebody grab my ankles. And we'll do a wheelbarrow, right, from the picnic. We'll do a wheelbarrow. It's a great way to get free drinks on a plane. You never need that. And so I thought, that's what I'm going to do. Like, I'll get out of the rig, I'll share this with Dave, we'll do a wheelbarrow. And so I had a plan. It won't be unassisted, but I don't think anybody's going to complain too much, right? I think it'll still be a fair amount of work. So that was my plan. Dave went down, he fixed the winch, he met us for daylight. I got on the winch, and it worked. And it was miserable. I mean, like, how often does somebody say, like, don't live life in the past, don't live life in the future, like, be in the moment. I was trying to distract myself from the moment as much as I could, because it was so painful. I was like, I just want to get to 100 revolutions that I can stop, and I never made it to 100. Then it was like, I'm going to get to that rock right there. That's it. I thought Bob was trying to be helpful. Turns out he was trying to be annoying. He was doing an amazing job with it. Kept coming up to me and saying, slow and steady wins the race. Like, dude, really? You have any idea how hard I'm trying to achieve slow and steady? We made it to the boulders. And Dave and the African guides started making plans to carry me. I did not mention my idea to do the wheelbarrow. Years later, somebody asked me, why didn't you do that? And I had to think back on it, and I think I had two diametrically opposed desires. One, I wanted to prove that I could do whatever I wanted to do, that I could make the impossible happen. But the other part, from the time I left the hospital and went back to school, so many of my friends said to me, I could never do what you've done. In their eyes, I became a superhero. And then I went and won some things, and I became more of a superhero. And when I retired, I had no idea where that superhero image stopped and where I started. It didn't allow me to be honest, didn't allow me to be vulnerable, didn't allow me to struggle, which is that thing that we share with everybody, which can be so empowering, which is really the definition of being human, is that struggle. So it turned out that the 100 feet that they carried me was the greatest gift that I could have received, because it allowed me to separate from that superhero image. It allowed me to be me. It allowed me to be human. But I didn't get that in the moment. In the moment, as we went from the crater rim down into the crater of the dormant volcano, I was crushed because I felt like I'd failed so many people. My team had worked for 2 years just to give me the opportunity to climb the mountain. I felt like I failed them. Those 1.2 billion people whose lives I was trying to improve, they didn't even know who I was. But I felt like I failed them, so I was crushed and I was livid, and I kept thinking, I've got to talk to Dave. Dave developed that vehicle so it looks like a Mars rover, married to arm pedal power. He ran up and down this 19,000-foot mountain 5 times to scout it out, to find the best route for me. And I finally got a quiet moment as we're going through the crater, which is really like a dried lake bed, just all this silt. And I finally got a quiet moment, and I took Dave aside and I said, Dave, you disappointed me. You let me lie to all these people. You let me tell them I could do it unassisted. And you knew that those boulders were there. You knew that I couldn't do it. Dave guides throughout the world, and he said, nobody climbs a mountain alone. Everybody does it as part of a team. So this is that epiphany moment for me where I go, oh, you mean from the time I was in the hospital, I'd be bigger, better, faster, stronger in order to be equal? I had to say, oh, I can do it myself for fear of being a burden to my friends and family. Because if I was a burden, then they might leave me. But if I didn't want to be alone, I needed to be part of the team. My struggle the first 5.5 days empowered my team to join that struggle. And the next day, we achieved the seemingly impossible. We made it to the top of the tallest mountain in Africa. And I'll tell you, the feeling was euphoria. But it was also relief. We told so many people that we were going to do this. We told people to watch, and it's like, okay, well, we actually made it. And it was also disbelief in that we'd actually done this thing that seemed completely impossible. And I'll tell you what, the euphoria lasted until I landed at JFK. My team had all disbanded. We were like $250,000 in debt at this point. Suddenly, I was all alone. We're on the tarmac at JFK, and we're taxiing. And I thought, why do I always do things the hard way? And I think there's a part of it that doing things the hard way is because that's how I learn the most, is doing things the hard way. You learn the most by doing something that is that difficult. But the realization was that the top of one mountain is the bottom of the next mountain. I don't know about you, but I feel like it's this human condition that we feel like we have two diametrically opposed desires. That one, we want to be successful, and we think of successful as like a destination. Like once I get there, then I'm there, then that's it. And it's like, that's a fantasy, because no matter who we are, something's going to challenge us, right? Whether it's death, disease, divorce, bankruptcy, all of these things can challenge all of us, having to move locations. But the other side is we don't want to grow old. We want to continue to learn and grow and dream. And if we're going to learn and grow and dream, that means continuing to find those new mountains and looking at the mountain, the top of that mountain was the bottom of the next mountain, and it was back to the TV show. And what I had to do was I had to tell the story. So I went out and I shared the story and continue to share that story. I still want to get that TV show going, but it hasn't quite worked yet. But to me, it's not about the big thing as much as it is about the little thing. When I look back on being a competitive athlete, you know what the thing I miss about being a competitive athlete is? 2-a-days. Like getting up in the morning, going and doing a workout, coming back, eating, showering, taking a nap, going out and doing it again. That's the stuff that I miss. It's not the top step of the podium. It's doing that work, because again, that's when that metamorphosis happens. So what I do in my office, I have, and these 3 slides are all one picture in my office, but I put down my reminder of how I can grow confidence. So purpose, goal, and role, My purpose is to turn perception of disability upside down. And disability is the wheelchair, but it's also that thing that stands between us and doing what we want to do. That to me is the definition of disability. But we can be better at our job. Like, it's to be efficient, effective, and healthy. I mean, how often do we actually think about the idea of being healthy in what we do? It's so easy just to grind ourselves down. And my job is to tell the story. These are my historical reasons to be confident. Yeah, I mean, I recovered from a broken back. That was a fairly big deal. Some of the other things that are kind of mentioned, I acted in a soap opera, which is kind of a big deal. Something I never thought I would have ever done. Learning how to draw, I thought learning how to draw was either like learning how to sing or not, like either you could or you couldn't. But I actually learned how to draw, which was pretty cool. But think about like the stuff that we take for granted, like learning how to walk and talk. Obviously, I'm not very good at the former anymore. But how hard would that be if we had to learn how to do that right now? It'd be absolutely amazing. I don't know if anybody has tried to learn a foreign language or speaks a foreign language, but thinking about how hard that is. So that to me, I look back on these and go, I need these reminders of how to be confident. My heroes back in the day, those heroes that I was reading back in 5th grade, so many of them talked about confidence at the root of their success. But it makes it feel like it's God-given. We can be responsible for creating that confidence, which is going to make us that much more successful. And this is my checklist to grow confidence. You know, as I prepare to start my day on time with passion, purpose, and priority to move the needle. Like, that's easy enough to start our day that way, right? Passion, purpose, and priority to move the needle. Some of these things I think are kind of interesting. Was I generous to myself and others? How often do we think we're going to work hard and grind ourselves down? And the contrast that I want to create here is between Usain Bolt and a kid in T-ball. Okay? Now Usain Bolt, you've seen when they slow down the image of him sprinting and they show his face, and it's like bouncing all around, right? Like everything that's not going into going fast is actually relaxed. It's like being a cat in so many ways, right? But you contrast that with the kid in T-ball, and the coach is like, dig, 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 like hustle, hustle, hustle. And it looks like a cartoon character, you know, like the hands are here, the head goes straight back. It looks like he or she is just going to like dig a hole in the ground. Like, how often do we do the latter side of it and like just beat ourselves up and grind ourselves into it and think, can I be generous to myself and others? I love the staying curious part. I have a buddy who was a Navy SEAL, and he said when he was going through training, they'd ask for volunteers, and every single hand would go up. And you think, can I volunteer? Is that the person that I want to remember? So, anyway, I think if we can look at it, it's not the top of the mountain, but it's that each little moment, each time, it's winning that battle with ourselves. I was the most powerful I've ever been when I was in the hospital after my accident. And what I call it is realizing possible. And realizing possible is ignoring that impulse, that chemical impulse to quit or to panic in the moment. And if we ignore the impulse to quit and to panic in the moment, that's when we get to the top of the mountain. So thank you so much for letting me be a part of your day.
We have a moment for a few questions. Who has a question? Ed.
We have a gentleman here. When you start that show, you know, you can teach him how to snow ski. That would be wonderful. So
okay, good. I like it when so we're a little confused on the volunteering part. But yeah, volunteering someone else.
Train him how to
He
ski.
was just voluntold.
Voluntold, exactly.
So many folks that are goal-oriented achieve so much, always have a next thing. Besides the TV show, what's the next thing?
What's the next thing for me? It's always a question. That's what Bob asked me as soon as I came off the mountain, and I think I was like, a shower and a beer. Really is what it came down to. Then, but what's the next thing? The next thing, I live in Park City, Utah. And I don't know if any of you saw, we are like 99% of the way there to getting the Olympics and the Paralympics returning back to Utah for 2034, which is 10 years from now, which is, well, not quite 10 years, but almost 10 years from now, a little bit more. And so really the big initiative that I'm doing right now is trying to reach a whole bunch of schools. In my foundation, we do a program called Name Tags. And it's about moving beyond the labels and limitations that we put on ourselves and others. And so we're looking to get to all the schools in Utah, 1,000 plus schools in Utah. So that's my big push. But it's also trying to figure out how to be more efficient. And I do want to get the TV show in there. Really, I do a lot of work with NBC. I do analyst stuff for skiing, for track and field, for the opening and closing ceremonies. For the Paralympics, I'm trying to move into the host role. At one point, I did sit next to Bob Costas at dinner and say that I wanted his job. I'm sure I was not the only one who's ever said that. But yeah, oh, that's cute. That's good. But yeah, so those are, so really the school thing is the big initiative at the moment, but I do want to find a bigger venue to be able to tell that story, and the host part would be. And so it's kind of interesting because I also do it once every 2 years as opposed to like doing it every day. So it's much harder for the producers to say, oh yeah, you'll be great, for 2 straight weeks of no sleep and all of those things. But yeah. Okay.
First of all, thank you for sharing.
Oh,
It's
you're welcome.
beautiful and inspiring. And I want to know what point number 4 is on your checklist.
Point number 4 is, did I touch it once? So this is kind of an interesting thing in that I don't know if any of you other people have this affliction, but when you get that email and you're like, oh, I've got that email, and you're like, let me think about that. And how many times a day do we do, let me think about that, and the whole thing just stacks up? And it's like, can I touch it once? If I'm going to open it, will I respond to it? And that's the idea, is to keep the flow going through. And it's a reminder. That is one of my bigger stumbling blocks. But it's a reminder each day of like, touch it once, in, out, yes. If you're going to, yeah. Exactly.
Can you tell us about People Magazine and how that helped elevate your platform?
Sure, can you, yes, exactly. Well, why am I giggling all of a sudden? Yeah, exactly. I'm probably blushing like the same color as your dress. But People Magazine, how did that affect my future? It actually, because I probably told you this as we were talking, right? Being in People Magazine, so it was 1998, this was the year of the Titanic, Leo was on the cover. I was in what I think was kind of like the other cover, because there was a perfume right next to my page. So if you drop the magazine, it opens to my page. And it smells, good. But yeah, People Magazine actually came about as a result. I was doing some modeling at the time, and the guy who was promoting the modeling agency, which was an entirely disabled modeling agency, so he was trying to change the prototype of what could be considered beautiful. And he put a bunch of books, sent a bunch of books to them, and they said, hey, we'd like to hold on to my book for this. And I was visiting my girlfriend at the time, and he called me and said, hey, by the way, People Magazine wants to put you in the 50 most beautiful people. And I was like, hey, that's good. I know you're selling uphill the whole day, everything, like that's good. And I sort of humored him, and he called back the next day and said, okay, we've got to schedule the shoot. And I was like, for what? It's like, for People Magazine, for the most beautiful people. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's real. Like, I thought you were just selling. I thought you were just selling. And so we ended up shooting. We competed in Nagano that year. On the way home, we spent 2.5 days in Waikiki. I had to keep it a complete secret, right? Because if it ever got out, then they'd pull me from the thing. And so I went off and shot at the Pink Hawaiian. I don't know if anybody's ever been there. It's one of the sort of like an Art Deco kind of old school Hawaii place, and shot there totally covertly. We shot it, and then it came out, and it came out actually right after we went to meet the president, which after the games, the Olympians and the Paralympians go to meet the president. And I'd saved me a little bit that it came out right afterwards, because of course somebody would have picked it up at the airport, and then I would have had a really hard time. But it did, I'm just gonna throw it on the ground now. It did more for my ability to make a living as an athlete than all of the medals that I won combined.
Wow.
My sponsorship tripled that year. And it was great. One of my sponsors had been slow in getting their contracts out, and I knew it was coming, and I was like, let's just hold off. We'll sign that after I come back. And so it ended up tripling my sponsorship. But it's evergreen. I mean, it is always the last thing that people say when they introduce me. And I was at some school in Chicago, and they introduced all this, Paralympic medals and Dalai Lama and this stuff and everything. And then People Magazine, and the kids like, ooh, and the principal's next to me said, well, they're saying that about that other stuff too. I was like, no, they're not. It really is just People Magazine. You use what you get, and if somebody else says it, then it's usually true.
Why don't we follow up with the 50 most beautiful people, but we have time for one more question.
I just wanted to say, to this date, I cannot keep up with Chris skiing or biking. I cannot possibly catch up with him. And I've known him for about 15 years.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about, tell everybody how many speeches you give in a year and how you've gotten to the point where you've spoken as many places as you have and built all of this.
Yeah, so how many speeches? So speeches actually started for me, I was panic stricken talking in front of groups, like as a kid, like growing up. It was one of those, like, you've got to go talk in front of the group, and it's like the knees shake, the lips shake, the voice shakes, all that stuff. The year, so after my accident, I had my accident, I went back to college, then I went to a secondary rehabilitation place called Shake-A-Leg. And I was going in, I'm like, okay, I'm reeling into this place, and I'm walking out. That was the whole objective, and my straight leg braces arrived right at the end of the summer. And as they arrived, an off-Broadway company came in, and they said, well, you should audition for the play. And I was like, no, I'm here to walk, I'm here to do this, I'm not interested in that other stuff. And they impressed upon me, you need to audition. So I auditioned. It was about the summer of saying yes. You'll see that in the book. And so I started working with these guys, and they're two big partners in the company. Bernie Telsey's like the casting agent to the Oscars. He's on the board for the Oscars, cast from Rent and all the Disney stuff and crazy stuff. Bobby Lapone was the original lead on Chorus Line, and I effectively got like a tutorial from these guys. They made me do scenes in gibberish. I guess I can tell this story. I had a professional actress who was playing my girlfriend in the play. She had just had a baby. Her husband and baby were over there in the corner. We were auditioning in our dining room at the place. And she sat on my lap during our little scene, and she was supposed to give me a kiss. So she sat on my lap, she gave me a kiss, and all of a sudden there was a tongue in my mouth. And I totally pulled back, and these guys gave me such a hard time. I'm like, what, you can't act? Like, what the? I was like, there's a baby over there, like this. And I'm looking at her husband, I'm like, I had absolutely nothing to do with any of this. But that was the beginning of speaking, really, for me, was getting to this 8th grade auditorium, 500 people in the audience, and feeling that energy back and forth and going, I can get started. And some of it is like being in a ski race for me, is getting started quickly. When I was racing downhill, I often felt like the race was to the first gate, that if you could be committed to going as fast as possible to the first gate, that it would make sense that mentally things would start to slow down and you'd keep trying to go faster, because if you're trying not to go fast, everything seems really fast. But yeah, so now I probably do like 100 presentations a year with my foundation. I just did 6 of them in 3 days around the East Coast last week, up in New York and Connecticut and New Jersey. And yeah, I mean, I feel like so much of what we're trying to do, and back to the TV show in some ways, is we're trying to master ourselves. We're trying to master our craft. And that's a lifetime pursuit of trying to master our craft, trying to master ourselves, figure out how we can do it well, how we can react better in situations to be more efficient. And so, yes, I'll do like 100 a year, and it's really, it's to me, it's the same as performing. It's the moment right there where I go, why did I say I would do this? And then getting up here and going, all right, here we go, this is gonna be great. So anyway, yeah, that's the speaking, and thank you guys for bringing me in, and thank all of you. It was so great to work with you. Thank you.